Hello and welcome to our listeners around the world to the Enlightenment Podcast. There is so much to talk about at this time in the world, and especially right now, we want to focus on Palestine to build awareness, to give some context that we feel is sometimes missing, and to reach as many people as possible. Today, we'll be talking again about a few different things, but our focus will definitely be on Gaza. So, Hanan, where can we start?
So let's quickly recap, Shamim, what we discussed in previous episodes.
Okay, here's a quick recap. We talked about Palestinian generational trauma. We talked about Arab Jews. We talked about Jews living in the Muslim world in the past and currently, and the influence of Christian and Jewish Zionism, which really led to the UN then voting to partition Palestine.
And also we talked about the long-term Zionist plan to colonize Palestine from the 19th century onwards, focusing on displacing the indigenous Palestinian people.
Yep, and therefore as a result, the taking over of people's homes and lands, exactly like what happened to your mom and her family in Jerusalem and Haifa in 1948.
Yeah, and we covered the 1948 Nakba, the catastrophe that forced the expulsion of over 750,000 Palestinians, and also the Naksa in 1967 and the forced expulsion of over 300,000 Palestinians.
Yeah. And then in the very last episode, we covered Israeli apartheid and the anti-colonial fight against displacement and how Palestinians, whether they're citizens of Israel or citizens of the West Bank or Gaza, live under different military rules to the rest of Israel.
Yeah.
And also we did touch on the fact, I think it does always bears repeating, that the Palestinian struggle is not against Jewish people. It is a fight for recognition, for statehood against the illegal occupation. And it's something that more and more Jewish people, some that we know, are distancing themselves from a Zionist ideology, which is a very different thing.
Yes, exactly. And some are finding out the truth about the reality of the Zionist project, and they're speaking out and they're disassociating themselves more and more from Zionism.
Yeah. And under international law, it's important to state again that Palestinians do have the right to resist illegal occupation and the right to defend themselves. And so with that in mind, that was a quick recap. Let's get into discussing Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, truly heartbreaking what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank and also in Lebanon. So really, from 1948, from the Nakba, if you like, and also the Palestinians, sorry, who are living as Israeli citizens from 1948.
Yeah, it is tragic all the way around and literally tragic. There are just no words to explain the pain and sorrow and horror of what we're seeing every day and what we're seeing not being stopped. And Gaza used to be a thriving port back in the day and a trade center for thousands of years because it's, of course, very strategically located.
Yeah, exactly. And after the 1948 Nakba, a large number of refugees went into Gaza, and the same thing in 1967. So after being ethnically cleansed from their homes, from their land, and many of them ended up in Gaza as refugees. So from the 2.3 million Palestinians in Gaza, roughly 1.8 million or just over are refugees from the Nakba and the Naksa.
Yeah. So after the Nakba of 1948 and up to the 1967 war, Gaza was under Egyptian administration until Israel illegally occupied Gaza in 1967. Then we had the Intifada, the Palestinian uprisings that we talked about previously. And Israeli occupying forces withdrew from Gaza, I believe, in 2005 and dismantled illegal settlements that they had there.
Yeah, I mean, they withdrew, but they continued to control Gaza and in many major ways, really.
Like what, for example?
Well, I mean, they controlled the food, they controlled utilities, water, they controlled all the entry and exit points. So all access was controlled through the Israeli occupying forces, except for one that was controlled by Egypt.
Yeah, so let's give some concrete examples. The Israeli occupying forces control the border crossings with Gaza, where all trucks carry food, goods, humanitarian aid. And that's controlled at the Kerem Shalom crossing in the southeast of Gaza, and in the northern part of Gaza, the Beit Hanun crossing, which is also known as the Erez crossing, was the only one open for Palestinians who had permits to work in Israel, and with other limited permits, sometimes used for cargo.
Yeah, and these crossings are really absolutely critical for not only the movement of goods and people, but living in Gaza, but for everyday existence.
Yeah, and the third crossing that we've heard about during this genocide is the Rafah crossing, and that is between Gaza and Egypt, where people were trying to being squashed basically. And it used to be controlled by Egypt, but now Israel has taken over operational control of that from Egypt.
Yes, that's from um, around June, if you like. Well, first of all, the Zionist colony imposed a blockade on Gaza in 2007. So let's go back a bit. And with severe restrictions of the movements and the goods. So that means limited access to food and humanitarian aid, as I mentioned. So that blockade has been going on for at least 18 years now, almost 18 years.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people seem to forget because they behave as if Gaza is under its own rule and its own Palestinian world, but it has and this has been criticized internationally that Israel has controlled for all of these years the water, the electricity, the utilities, the internet, and basic services in Gaza, and we can see how quickly they're able to choke it off and starve people now as a result.
Yeah, and a lot of human rights organizations refer to Gaza as the largest open air prison, and it's because of the ongoing illegal blockades by Israel.
Yeah, David Cameron, even David Cameron, I want to say, I don't
Even
know if I
David
would say that,
Cameron.
but I want to say it. Even David
Yeah,
Cameron
I know.
condemned this blockade and said that the blockage by Israel turned Gaza into, quote, a prison camp. This is not our words, it's other people's words. Another one for you in 2004 in an interview, Giora Eiland, who was a retired Israeli general, head of the Zionist colony's National Security Council, described Gaza as a huge concentration camp.
Yeah, exactly. And now the Israeli occupying military is looking at the general's plan, they call it, or also known as the Eland plan. And also it involves the ethnic cleansing, especially of northern Gaza, where they want to stop all humanitarian supplies from entering and starving those who are left. And we're seeing it now live unfold, sadly.
Yeah, they're not looking at it, they're executing it. And Ireland was behind this plan, and it was published in late September 2024 by the Forum of Commanders and Soldiers in the Reserves, who are an Israeli NGO. So
Yeah.
that's how everybody became aware that this was very much a plan that had been plotted out and conceived and is now being executed to genocide Gaza.
Yeah, and he also said that Gaza must be completely destroyed and all Gazans must starve. Nice man.
Well, and there you go. And again, once again, we don't have to take it from us. The Zionists are telling us what they're thinking. So, people who want to argue about that just go straight to the source on that. Let's go back to this 18-year-old illegal blockade of Gaza, which never really got much airplay. It started in 2007, and it significantly restricted the movement of people and goods and services in and out. This constitutes collective punishment of the population, does it not? Which is prohibited under international humanitarian law, specifically the Fourth Geneva Convention.
Very much so. And this illegal blockade led to acute shortages for the Palestinians living in Gaza under siege for over 18 years.
Yeah, and we're talking about chronic electricity shortages, just like a few hours a day, which of course impacts your heating, your lighting, your ability to study at night, hospitals, because refrigeration of vaccines and essential medicines, and other critical infrastructure. And we are talking about decades now. This is before last October. This was everyday life for Gazans.
Yeah, and there's also been a water crisis in Gaza, which has been very acute, and sanitation being severely impacted since the illegal blockade. So, with almost 96% of water being not fit or unfit for human consumption, and of course, it affects the agriculture, public health, and daily life, really.
Yeah, so really we can say that this blockade of 18 years has caused severe shortages of medical supplies, equipment, healthcare in general. And then with the restrictions on the import of building materials like cement and steel and all of that stuff, it meant that there's also this restriction in developing infrastructure and developing houses.
Yeah, it made it very hard to rebuild the areas that were devastated by bombings and attacks by the Israeli occupying forces.
Yeah. So, not surprisingly, this blockade stifled the economy, leading to very high unemployment in Gaza and poverty. And that's separate from food security issues, which have always been an issue, because the illegal blockade limits the type of food. And we're talking again pre-October 7th. Gazans have been limited to their amount of food and the type of food, diversity of food that they're allowed to have. And that always affects the price of food. They've been limited to the fishing that they can do. They've been limited to calorie intake since that blockade started.
Yeah, and as if that wasn't enough, that the majority of Palestinians are already refugees in their own country, from their country, if you like, who lost their homes, their land, and basically everything, and who end up being tortured, massacred, ethnic cleansed, and having, on top of all that, you have 18 years of blockade, as we talked about. So not many people know about this policy, and this is referred to as putting Palestinians on a diet that you talked about, the calorie control.
Yeah, it's such a horrifying euphemism, putting Palestinians on a diet. But again, it was used in 2006, not by me or Hanan, but by Don Weissglass, who was the advisor in 2006 of Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. And at the time, it was condemned by various human rights organizations as inhumane and a form of collective punishment, as we would all feel if we had our calories restricted by an occupying force.
Absolutely, it's brutal. And this policy started officially in 2007. And then what happened was Israeli started to calculate the minimum number of calories needed to prevent malnutrition in Gaza. And this determined the quantities of food that they allowed into Gaza to meet those caloric needs, if you like. Now they don't care. We see it. But at that time, they still sort of wanted to pass under the international scrutiny, if you like.
Yeah, and now they can do it with impunity, it seems. But all of this that we're talking about now, the caloric intake, was exposed in a red line document, which was leaked by Gisha, an Israeli human rights organization. And after a lengthy court battle, the red lines document was officially revealed and made public in 2021, and it exposed the calorie control policy that had been implemented since 2007.
Yeah. And this policy was widely criticized by human rights groups, the United Nations, Israeli human rights like B'Tselem, Amnesty International, among many others. One can imagine the outcry if, say, Jewish Israelis were being starved of calories by an Arab nation. I mean, you can imagine the indignation. Or let's say the French were controlling how much food the British can have and come into the British island. It's really unthinkable. And yet somehow it's acceptable because it's Palestinians on the receiving end. I also wanted to mention that the Israeli Zionist colony also controls the utilities and resources in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, not only Gaza. And that's been the case since their illegal occupation since 1967. So they've been controlling everything throughout.
Yeah, and tell me a bit about the water resources, the control of that it's had a profound impact, I guess, on Palestinians and their livelihood.
Very much so. So there's a huge disparity in the water supply. So the illegal Zionist settlements in the West Bank get a lot more water versus the supply of water that Palestinian communities get.
Yeah, and even the seawater. I mean, one of Gaza's main food sources is fishing, but there are restrictions on Palestinian fishermen. This is again pre what October 7th, and since then they've just been shut out of the sea. But way before that, Palestinian fishermen were restricted in how much they could fish, how far out they could travel to fish.
Yeah, not only that, they bombed them, they opened fire on them. They damage, seize their boats, their equipment. And really, these fishermen are trying to feed their families to survive. So that's yet another blockade. So we talked about the other blockades, but this is a naval blockade against Palestinians. And I also, so I forgot to also mention they confiscate their boats and they confiscate their equipment as well. So they really squeeze them in every way.
Yeah, so this is something of the context that we're talking about wanting to bring here, because there is this idea sometimes in the media that this all just exploded on October the 7th and there was nothing behind it. But there was a Nakba in 1948, the Naksa of 1967, and the illegal occupation for almost 58 years, and the 18-year blockade in Gaza.
And on top of that, the Israeli occupying forces, IOF, I'm going to refer to them, have hit Gaza through aerial bombardment and continuously damaging infrastructure, electric, water supplies, of course, killing and injuring Palestinians in the process. And as you said, Shamim, this has been going on for years and years. It's not new to the Palestinians.
Yeah, the occupying army is supposed to be one of the most powerful in the world, especially their air force, because of the support that they have from Western governments, providing them with the latest technology and big defense budgets. Just last year alone, since October 2023, the US has provided the Zionist state of Israel with over $20 billion of military support, American support.
Yeah, and they all usually get over 4 billion every year. That's on top of. So we see continued mass bombings, continued massacring of civilians by air, by land. And I just want to kind of point out Gaza is one of the most densely populated areas in the world. So it's a narrow strip of land. It's about 25 miles long, around 5 miles wide, roughly. And when they use 2,000-pound bombs and other huge air attacks on a densely populated area of 2.3 million Palestinians, mainly civilians, and half of them are children, it does bring a lot of criticism. And now the world is seeing it, if you like.
Yeah, and again, this idea that we're defending ourselves, it's the Israeli military themselves refer to this strategy of carpet bombing as mowing the lawn. Just the indignity of it. Mowing the lawn was coined by Ephraim Inbar and Eitan Shamir, two Israeli academics who focused on strategic studies and military affairs. And it really meant regular military action against Palestinians without any plan to seek a permanent solution.
Yeah. And that strategy of mowing the lawn, it's like cutting grass to keep, well, they refer to it as cutting grass to keep Palestinians who are if you like, the grass in the analogy, and to keep them under control.
Yeah, of course, highly criticized for the level of violence it inflicts against civilians and for continuing to exacerbate the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Also, Gaza has had a major offensive by the IOF over the years.
Yeah. It has, and it's like you see Western powers and legacy medias and outlets really framing the whole narrative very differently. And by covering the 7th of October, we're not condoning anything or being anti-Semitic. We're just saying it's important to be pro-human life and to point out that people in Gaza really over the years have been treated worse than animals for decades. I mean, you see leaders from the Israeli government calling them human animals and all kinds of horrific things that you wouldn't call a human being. So, of course, no population will feel happy about their land being stolen, then being humiliated, dehumanized. It's just really unacceptable.
Yeah, I'll just give you a few examples of these heavy aerial bombings by the Israeli military in Gaza. From 2008 to 2009, there was Operation Cast Lead, I'm not sure, I guess Cast Lead, with over 1,400 Palestinian casualties, mainly women and children. Operation Pillar Defense in 2012, 160 Palestinians killed. Operation Protective Edge in 2014 lasted for 7 weeks, and over 2,100 Palestinians were killed. Again, mainly women and children. And Operation Guardian of the Walls in 2021 was for 11 days, and over 250 more Palestinians were killed, primarily civilians, of course.
And these attacks on Palestinians were all disproportionate use of force, so typically by air and with carpet bombing of Palestinian civilians and destroying Palestinian infrastructure.
And the Palestinians are not allowed to have an army or an air force or a navy to defend themselves. So, of course, this idea that they are a state is, in some way, shape, or form, is complete nonsense, especially when they are completely controlled.
Exactly. I mean, Palestinians are left with really no means of defending themselves against Israel's settler colonial aggression, if you like, and their brutal ongoing attacks.
Yeah, and we see these attacks happening now, obviously in Gaza, but also in Lebanon, and many, many hospitals are being targeted in Lebanon. So, it is clear that this is, there's another agenda going on here. And in the West Bank, settlers are armed, the soldiers are armed, and everybody is attacking Palestinian civilians, farmers, people, women trying to get into their homes, farmers picking their olives. But somehow the narrative still remains and is peddled that Israel is defending itself, even when Israel is openly admitting to wanting to take land that does not belong to it, whatever's left of Palestine. There's Netanyahu with his map of Greater Israel, a couple of years ago, and now Lebanon.
Yeah, and just to add, they also have been targeting UN personnel, medics, doctors, etc., both in Palestine and Lebanon.
Journalists, well,
sorry?
Journalists.
Oh, on journalists, and they don't even allow foreign journalists in. So because obviously they don't want them to see what's really going on. So, but under international law and the Geneva Convention, Palestinians who are illegally occupied have the right to resist occupation, including with arms struggle, as I mentioned in the last episode.
Yeah. Now, some people say, well, why don't Palestinians try to resist peacefully? I think they have many times. Can you give us an example?
Yes, of course. The Great March of Return of 2018 is one example, and that lasted till about December 27th of December 2019. So the Palestinians, the refugees, if you like, from Gaza were asking for their right to return to their ancestral home in Palestine. So they tried to do it peacefully to start with.
Yeah, and that Great March of Return started off as a peaceful march, but it turned into horrible violence with over 220, mainly Palestinian civilians, killed by the Israeli occupying forces, and with over 36,000 Palestinians, including 8,000 children, injured during those demonstrations.
8,800 children, but yeah.
Sorry, 2,800 children. Yeah, and not by mistake or stampeding. This was Israeli occupying forces getting involved.
Yeah, and the Israeli occupying forces were sniping at Palestinians and deliberately aiming at their knees, their legs, their lower limbs, and causing a very high number of severe injuries that caused permanent disabilities, amputations, and deliberate maiming. As we can see now, what's happening. And this is all documented. Again, don't take our word for it. You can look it up.
Amnesty International, other human rights organizations brought this up, the use of snipers in peaceful demonstrations, live ammunition, the excessive and lethal use of force, and the severe injuries that killed and maimed unarmed Palestinian protesters.
And for the last 12 months, as we have seen since October 23, the world is seeing the displacement and the mass slaughter of Palestinians in Gaza and now in the West Bank and Lebanon. So it's really very hard to watch. And while Western powers continue to fund, and while the ICJ and the UN have confirmed it's a genocide or plausible genocide, and they continue to send arms to support this ethnic cleansing with military, with intelligence, with equipment. It's really shocking.
And we've seen, although we're not allowed to see much anymore, the unfathomable destruction that's gone on, and that's civilian infrastructure and homes. So even if people survive, there is no way for them to get medical attention, to go to school, to live. the hospitals, healthcare centers, particularly targeted. And the death toll in the past 12 months that we know about is around 44,000 people killed. More than half of these are women and children, and thousands are still under the rubble. Well over 100,000 severely wounded and orphaned. And that is just in Gaza, let alone the Palestinians who have been killed in the West Bank, while all eyes are on Gaza, and Israel is definitely upping its offensive there. And now in these huge attacks on Lebanon, displacing millions.
Yeah. And in Gaza, that's almost 2% of the population killed in 12 months, which is massive. I mean, that's equivalent of around 6.6 million Americans being killed in 12 months, or 1.4 million British, or under 1 million Canadians. These are big numbers. And a lot of people say it's not a genocide. It is a genocide.
Yeah, well, there's a clear intent that has been spoken by the Israelis to clear out, by certain Israelis, to clear out the Palestinian population. So, it's very clear, and it's accelerating. And now we're seeing it in northern Gaza and across Israel. In northern Gaza, we're seeing that there's a starvation tactic in this general's plan, and depopulating Palestinians forcibly from their homeland. And there's cutting off of communication with the outside world. No reporters allowed.
Yeah.
Oh, horrible.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but this can't take place without the continued help of and support of the Western powers, who are really complicit in this genocide.
Yeah, and the claim has always been self-defense, but it is Palestinians who are living under occupation, and I think people forget this very basic reality. They are living under military rule, and they are being terrorized and dehumanized on a daily basis, just as a matter of course. So what about the safety and security of the Palestinians?
Exactly. And it doesn't make any sense that the Zionist colony of Israel continues to claim self-defense, as you said. I mean, how can it be self-defense when they have stolen someone else's land and they're occupying it illegally, and then killing Palestinians on Palestinian land and in their own homes? They are very much the aggressors. And it's very clear, and it's becoming clearer and clearer what the Zionist colony wants, which is more land over peace.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure anybody in the world would put up with their homes or their land and country being taken away violently, and they're being pushed into a situation where they're being calorie counted and restricted and bombed. So if you feel that you wouldn't mind that, please drop us a line in the comments, because I don't know anybody that would.
Yeah. And also to go through the ongoing massacres of their people, to be sent to prison, to administrative detentions, which we talked about in a previous episode, without charges and for years, to be tortured, raped, and really to live under the cruel occupation for almost 58 years, the longest occupation in history. Plus the blockade in Gaza is really too much for anyone.
That's right. That blockade and the permits that are needed for anybody to move across, and then this apartheid wall that also runs through the West Bank.
Yeah, yeah. And really to expect anyone to live under an apartheid regime, to ethnic cleanse them, and now to have a genocide in Gaza is really it's inhuman, it's not right. And now it's a genocide that's being broadcast on smartphones live for the world to see, and being broadcast by those who are being genocided, or I don't know what the word is.
Well, and the soldiers who are TikToking their way through some war crimes on social media. Moving on from that, what is the solution in your mind? And I know it's never going to see, there's no solution that seems easy, but tell us what the ideal would be.
Well, certainly not a two-state. I am off that completely. I think it's one country from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean Sea, where everyone has an equal vote, equal rights like any other human being, and with a multi-party system for people to coexist and with dignity, which ironically, that's how it used to be under historic Palestine, where you had Muslims, Jews, Christians, and all denominations living together. And really having an ethno-supremacist settler colonial apartheid state, Israeli state, is just not only unjust, but it's unacceptable in today's world. And there's really no room for it.
Okay, but how can we move towards that? Because, Zionists who want this area to be just for Jews, and they claim they will be in danger if Palestinians are allowed to be equal partners, not that they want them to be equal partners. And Palestinians, though, have not necessarily tried to wipe out Jews in the past in the same way that Zionists, not Jews, but Zionists have tried to ethnically cleanse Palestinians. Europeans have committed pogroms against the Jews horrifically, but not Palestinians.
Right. So to start with, a permanent ceasefire is the first thing that needs to happen. The withdrawal of the settlers, which because they're illegal, to basically remove all occupation forces from the territories, the right of return of Palestinian refugees and the Palestinians in diaspora back to their homes, just to name a few.
Yeah, and just to be clear, right now, any Jew in the world can move to Israel and have that right of return. So I don't think that's a huge problem that people make it out to be for Palestinians to go back. If they chose. It does mean that there would not be a wholly Jewish state though, and that would be a problem potentially for Zionists. But it all feels a very long way away. How can people help right now? You know, you can hear the frustration in my voice and Hanan's voice. How can we help? How can we make a change?
So, yeah, frustration it is. But as with South Africa, urgent boycotts are needed, sanctions, divestments against the Zionist settler colony. That will help, I believe. We've seen it happen in South Africa. Also, it's about the continuation of people to speak out, to attend demonstrations, to let their representatives know where they stand, to speak out against injustice. Sorry, and most importantly, I think it's the continued support of Jewish people from all over the world who do not agree with Zionism and the Jewish supremacy ideology of Zionism and the racist ideology. So the Jewish support has been increasing, and if it continues, it'll only help.
Yeah. Well, the Palestinian struggle is the struggle of a colonized indigenous people against a settler project, in this case, Zionism, that is not just about coming to find a new life in a new land, but displacing and replacing the people who are already there, in Zionism's case, only with Jewish people. And there's really, I don't think, a place in today's world where supremacist settler colonialism is tolerated or should be tolerated. It is being tolerated currently. There we go. I'm going to wrap up before I smoke starts coming out of my ears. Join us next episode. And we will be starting to talk to other people. And our next episode will be featuring a really smart international lawyer, Victor Catan, who you may guess from his name is related to Hanan. If you enjoyed this episode, please do like it, subscribe to us, and share with your friends and family as it helps us with spreading the word. Our aim for this podcast is to bring about our point of view of humanism. We try to do that without too much stress, but sometimes it all feels too much. But with your support and help, we can definitely do that.
And as always, we believe that stories matter and representation matters. So just to say a big thank you for taking the time to watch. Remember to like, subscribe, and share with your friends, and see you soon. Thank you.